Who would have thought? This was my golden ticket.
I was parked at a rest stop outside Dayton, Ohio when everything changed. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon and I'd just opened a dented can of store brand beans from the Dollar General discount rack. This was breakfast and lunch combined. My 2008 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it had become my entire world, and I'd learned months ago that the driver's seat doesn't recline far enough for a 6-foot man to sleep comfortably. The phone buzzing on my dashboard was probably another debt collector or some robot trying to sell me an extended warranty for a car that barely ran. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe boredom, maybe that last shred of hope that refuses to die even when everything else has. Hello? My voice came out rough. I hadn't talked to anyone in 3 days. Mr. David Patterson? The woman's voice was sharp and professional. Yeah, that's me. This is Linda Martinez from Anchorage County Records Office in Alaska. I'm calling about your property, parcel 82C559 in North Slope Borough. I actually laughed, a bitter sound that hurt my throat. Lady, you've got the wrong person. I don't own any property. I don't even own this car. The bank does. They're just slow on the repo. Sir, our records show you've owned 340 acres here since 1998. You inherited it from Walter Patterson when he passed away. Walter? The name hit me like ice water. My dad's older brother, a man I'd met exactly once when I was 7 years old. He'd shown up at our house in Columbus driving a truck that looked like it was held together with rust and prayer. Stayed 2 days, then vanished back to Alaska. I remembered him as tall and weathered, with hands like old leather and eyes that never seemed to focus on anything for long. Mr. Patterson, I need to inform you that you currently owe $47,000 in back property taxes. If these aren't paid by Friday at 5 p.m. Alaska time, the property will go to public auction. I stared at the $17 spread out on my passenger seat next to a roll of toilet paper I'd stolen from a gas station bathroom. You might as well ask me for $47 million. There was a pause, papers shuffling. Then Linda's voice came back different, lower, more urgent. Mr. Patterson, are you aware that Western Oil Corporation has been attempting to contact you for the past 3 years? Never heard of them. What about Arctic Reserve Energy or Summit Petroleum? Lady, I've been living in my car for 6 months. Nobody's been contacting me about anything except overdue bills. Sir, these companies have been searching for you regarding mineral rights to your uncle's land. They've hired private investigators. They've sent certified letters to 17 different addresses. My hand holding the phone started shaking. Why would oil companies care about some frozen dirt in Alaska? Mr. Patterson, geological surveys completed 3 years ago indicate significant oil deposits beneath your property. The mineral rights alone are currently valued at approximately $18 to $22 million. Conservative estimate. The can of beans slipped from my hand and hit the floor mat. Cold sauce splattered across my last clean pair of shoes. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't even blink. Mr. Patterson, are you still there? The world had gone silent except for blood pounding in my ears. $22 million. The number didn't make any sense. Nothing made sense. 6 months ago, my ex-wife Sarah and her boyfriend had taken everything I'd spent 22 years building. My plumbing business, my house, my trucks, my entire life. $4.2 million in total assets, gone with a judge's signature and my ex-wife's laughter echoing in the courthouse hallway. Enjoy poverty, she'd said outside the courtroom, her arm linked with Marcus Brennan, the divorce lawyer who'd orchestrated my complete destruction. Maybe it'll teach you what real work feels like. Now a stranger on the phone was telling me I'd been rich this entire time, sitting on a fortune while eating at food banks and showering at truck stops. This has to be a mistake, I finally managed to say. No mistake, Mr. Patterson. But I need you to understand something. If you don't pay the $47,000 in back taxes by 5 p.m. Alaska time this Friday, you lose everything. The land will be auctioned, likely to one of these oil companies for a fraction of its value. You have 72 hours. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 49 years old, hair gone more gray than brown, face gaunt from months of one meal a day. I was wearing a Goodwill shirt with someone else's name written on the tag. I looked like a man who'd lost everything, which I was. But apparently I was also a man who owned 340 acres of oil-rich Alaska land. What did my uncle do up there, I asked. According to our records, nothing. He lived in a trailer on the southeast corner of the property from 1973 until his passing in 1998. Never developed it, never sold it, never even leased it. Just paid the taxes every year until he passed. After that, the bills came to you, but it seems you never received them. I thought back to 1998. I'd been 23, had just started Patterson Plumbing Services with one van and more ambition than sense. Mail got forwarded, lost, ignored in the chaos of building a business and starting a family. Some legal notice about worthless Alaska tundra wouldn't have registered as important. Linda, I need you to understand something. I have $17 to my name. I can't pay $47,000 by Friday. I can't pay it by next Friday or next year. Then you need to find someone who can, Mr. Patterson, because at 5:01 p.m. Alaska time on Friday, you go from potentially having $20 million to having nothing. Again. That word hung between us. Again. Like she knew my story, understood what it meant to lose everything twice. Can you send me documentation? Proof of all this? I'm emailing everything to the address we have on file right now. david.patterson.mail@gmail. Yeah, that's right. The one thing I'd managed to keep, a free email account. Mr. Patterson, may I speak frankly? Sure. I've worked in this office for 15 years. I've never made a call like this. Usually it's just standard notices about small parcels maybe worth a few $1,000s. But your uncle's land, with those mineral rights and 3 major oil companies circling like sharks, this is life-changing money. Find a way to pay those taxes. Beg, borrow, sell blood if you have to. Because opportunities like this don't come twice. She was wrong about that last part. This was my second chance. The first had been building my business from nothing into something worth millions. But that empire had been built on trust in the wrong person, and it had crumbled in 8 months of legal proceedings orchestrated by a man I'd considered a friend. This was different. This was Uncle Walter, a man I barely knew, reaching out from the grave with a winning lottery ticket he'd been holding for 25 years. Thank you, Linda. I mean that. Good luck, Mr. Patterson. You're going to need it. The call ended. I sat in the silence of my car, surrounded by everything I owned. 2 changes of clothes, a sleeping bag, a camp stove that didn't work, and $17. Outside, normal people with normal lives drove past on their way to normal homes. They had no idea that the homeless-looking man in the beat-up Civic had just been told he was worth $20 million if he could find $47,000 in 3 days. Let me back up and explain how I got here, because the story doesn't start with that phone call. It starts 22 years before that, when I was 27 years old and stupid enough to think hard work and loyalty were all you needed to succeed. I started Patterson Plumbing Services with $800, a used van that burned oil, and a toolbox my father had left me when he died. I was married for 2 years to Sarah, and I was determined to build something that would last. The first year almost eliminated me. I worked 7 days a week, taking any job that paid. Unclogging toilets at 2 a.m., replacing water heaters in flooded basements, fixing burst pipes in dead-of-winter Ohio cold. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist then, bringing in steady money while I built our future one service call at a time. "You smell like sewage," she'd say when I came home after midnight. But she'd say it while heating up dinner she'd kept warm. Back then, it sounded like love. By year 5, I had 3 employees. By year 10, I had 12. Patterson Plumbing Services became the name businesses trusted in Columbus. We had contracts with office buildings, restaurants, 2 shopping centers, and the regional hospital. I bought our first real house when the twins, Emma and Olivia, were 5. A real house with a yard and a swing set, not the cramped apartment where we'd started. The business grew to be worth $2.8 million. Not because I was some genius, but because I answered every call, honored every contract, and treated every backed-up pipe like it mattered. The house in Upper Arlington was worth $850,000, decorated exactly how Sarah wanted it. She'd quit working when the girls started school, said she wanted to focus on being a mother. I never questioned it. Why would I? We were building a life together. Our days had a rhythm. I'd leave at 5 a.m., kiss Sarah while she slept, head to the shop. She'd get the girls ready for school, manage the house, handle our social calendar. She joined the country club, started playing tennis, made friends with other wives whose husbands owned businesses. I was glad she was happy. All those early mornings and late nights meant something because my family was thriving. The twins were smart like their mother, ambitious like me. Emma wanted to be a doctor. Olivia was interested in engineering. We saved for their college from the day they were born. Ohio State for both of them. No student loans, no financial stress. That was the dream I worked for. Sarah started her Thursday book club when the girls were in high school. Just us girls discussing literature, she said. You wouldn't be interested, David. Too much feelings talk. She was right. I preferred blueprints to book discussions. The legal seminars came next. She said she wanted to understand business better, to be more help to me. I was touched. After 20 years of marriage, she still wanted to be more involved in my work. We should update our estate planning, Sarah suggested one night over dinner. The business is worth so much now. We need to protect the girls' future. She'd found a lawyer through her tennis club. Marcus Brennan came highly recommended. Harvard Law, specialized in business structures and asset protection. His office had leather chairs and dark wood shelves, lined with legal books that looked like they'd never been opened. David, buddy, you've built something impressive here, Marcus said during our first meeting. He had that easy confidence that comes from never having dirt under your fingernails. Let's make sure it's bulletproof, legally speaking. The papers he prepared were thick, full of language I didn't understand. Trust structures, asset transfers, tax shelters. Sarah had already read everything, had sticky notes marking where I should sign. It's just paperwork, honey, she said when I hesitated. Marcus explained everything to me. This protects us. If someone ever sues the business, it keeps our personal assets separate. I signed. Of course I signed. This was my wife of 22 years, the mother of my children, the woman who'd eaten ramen noodles with me in a roach-infested apartment while I chased my dream. Why wouldn't I trust her? Marcus became a regular presence. He'd stop by the house to drop off documents. He came to our 4th of July barbecue, brought expensive wine, complimented my grilling. He laughed at my jokes, asked about the business, acted like we were friends. You should teach a business course, David, he said, standing in my backyard drinking my beer. From nothing to millions. That's the American dream right there. I actually liked him. That's the part that would burn the worst later. I genuinely liked the man who was secretly dismantling my life one legal document at a time. The last normal day was a Monday in March. I kissed Sarah goodbye, went to work, solved problems, came home to a house that smelled like pot roast. We watched TV together, talked about Emma's graduate school applications, went to bed at 10 p.m. like we had 1,000 times before. Tuesday morning, Tom Russell, my foreman, met me at the shop door. His face told me something was wrong before he handed me the envelope. Some lawyer-looking guy said to give this to you immediately, said it was urgent. Inside was the end of everything I'd built. Divorce papers, 63 pages of lies wrapped in legal language, emotional misuse, financial manipulation, hidden assets, domestic neglect. Every accusation precisely crafted to destroy not just my marriage, but my character. My hands shook as I read terms I'd never said, incidents that never happened, a version of me that existed only in those typed pages. I drove straight home, breaking every speed limit. The house was quiet when I burst through the door. Too quiet. Then I saw them in the kitchen. Sarah sat at our breakfast table, the one where our daughters had eaten cereal for 18 years. Marcus sat beside her, his hand covering hers. "Hello, David," Sarah said calmly, like I'd just come home from a normal day at work. "What is this?" I held up the papers. "The end of pretending," she said. "Sit down. We should discuss this like adults." I stayed standing. "How long?" Marcus started to speak, but I cut him off. "I'm not talking to you. How long, Sarah?" 18 months, she said, lifting her chin with something like pride. Marcus helped me understand what I was really worth, what I deserved. Our daughters know. We told them last week. They understand. They see how you prioritized work over family for 20 years. That was the first knife. The twins, my reasons for everything, had known for a week while I'd been going to work, planning their futures, completely oblivious. "Get out of my house," I told Marcus. "Actually," he said, standing slowly, "it's Sarah's house. Has been for 6 months. You signed the papers, remember? Asset protection." The second knife. Those papers I'd signed without reading, trusting my wife's sticky notes and reassurances. I'd signed away my own home. "The business is mine," I said. 51% belongs to Sarah, Marcus replied, pulling out his phone to show me documents. "You made her majority owner last year. For tax purposes, you agreed. Your signature's right there." The third knife and the deepest. My business, built from nothing, wasn't mine anymore. "You planned this," I said to Sarah. "Every document, every signature." "I planned my freedom," she corrected. 22 years of watching you come home filthy, pretending to be proud of you, pretending your little plumbing empire meant something. Do you know what the women at the club call you? David the Drain Man, and I had to smile and defend you. Marcus showed me what actual success looks like. I hired Lawrence Chen that afternoon, a decent attorney who came recommended by my accountant. Lawrence reviewed everything, and his face went pale. "David, these documents you signed are ironclad. You transferred majority ownership of everything to Sarah over the past 2 years." I didn't know what I was signing. "That's not a legal defense. You're a successful businessman. No judge will believe you signed documents without understanding them." The divorce proceedings lasted 8 months. Every court appearance was a masterclass in legal destruction. Sarah's attorney, not Marcus officially, but his partner at the firm, presented me as a tyrant who'd hidden assets, manipulated finances, and emotionally terrorized my family. They brought in a forensic accountant who discovered supposed discrepancies in the business books, money that had supposedly vanished. It was all fabrication, but it looked legitimate on paper. 3 of my own employees testified that Sarah was the real brains behind the business success. Tom Russell told me later they'd been promised jobs at competing companies if they cooperated. The judge, Patricia Thornton, seemed to have her mind made up before I ever spoke. I learned later that Marcus's firm had contributed $30,000 to her re-election campaign. Emma and Olivia wouldn't answer my calls. Sarah had shown them evidence of affairs that never happened, secret credit cards that didn't exist. She'd convinced them that their college funds, which I'd protected in separate accounts, were actually money I'd stolen from their mother. The final ruling came in November. Sarah received the business, the house, all investment accounts. Everything except my personal truck and $30,000. The judge called it equitable distribution based on the respondent's pattern of financial misuse. I stood in the courtroom as the decision was read, watching my life's work get handed to a woman who now looked at me with pure contempt, and her boyfriend who'd orchestrated the whole theft. Outside the courthouse, they were waiting. "You should have treated me better," Sarah said, loud enough for passing strangers to hear. "All those years of playing the big shot while I suffered in silence." Marcus stepped forward. "It's over, buddy. Accept it. Enjoy poverty. Maybe it'll teach you humility." Sarah laughed then, a sound I'd never heard from her in 24 years of marriage. "He's right, David. Poverty suits you better. You always were just a glorified plumber with delusions of grandeur." They walked away together toward Marcus's Mercedes while I stood there with nothing but the keys to a 10-year-old truck and the knowledge that I'd been destroyed by the two people I'd trusted most. The truck lasted 3 weeks before the repo man found it. I watched from across the parking lot as they loaded it onto a flatbed, my last connection to the life I'd built. That night, I traded my anniversary watch, a gift from Sarah worth $3,000, for a 2008 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles and a heater that only worked on high. The Civic became my home, my office, my entire world compressed into 40 square feet of stained fabric and cracked plastic. I learned the rules of homelessness quickly. Rotate parking spots so security doesn't notice you. Rest stops are safer than streets. Truck stops have showers if you can afford them. The YMCA offers day passes for $10 when you need to feel human again. For 2 months, I told no one. My brother Kevin called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. My mother, 78 and living on Social Security in Florida, didn't need to know her successful son was eating from food banks. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than hunger. Day labor became my income. Loading trucks at warehouses for $60 cash, painting apartments for slumlords who paid under the table, moving furniture for college kids who didn't make eye contact. At 49, my back screamed through every shift, but complaining was a luxury I couldn't afford. The worst part was seeing my business trucks around Columbus. Patterson Plumbing Services, the logo I'd designed myself, now driven by strangers. I watched from my car once as they serviced the Marriott downtown, a contract I'd negotiated 5 years earlier. The new guy was doing it wrong, using cheap parts I'd never allow, but it wasn't my problem anymore. Sarah had kept Tom Russell as foreman for exactly 2 months before replacing him with Marcus's cousin, someone who'd never held a wrench but had an MBA. Russell found me at a rest stop one night, handed me $200 through my window. "The business is tanking, David. She's lost half the contracts already. Doesn't understand that relationships matter more than spreadsheets." "Not my problem," I said, but we both knew that was a lie. That business had been my child before my actual children were born. Winter in Ohio living in a car is a special kind of hell. The cold seeps through every gap, finds every weakness. I'd run the engine for heat until the gas gauge dropped too low, then burrow into a sleeping bag rated for temperatures I never reached. Some mornings, ice formed inside the windshield from my breath. Food became an obsession. The Methodist Church served lunch on Tuesdays. The Salvation Army had dinner Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Food banks required proof of address I didn't have, but some volunteers looked the other way. I learned to make a can of beans last 2 meals, to save packets of crackers from soup kitchens, to ignore the constant gnawing hunger that became my baseline. My daughters never called. I'd sent letters to their dorms at Ohio State, explaining my side, begging them to listen. They came back unopened. Sarah had poisoned that well thoroughly. To them, I was the villain who'd betrayed their mother, stolen their security, shown my true nature after decades of deception. 6 months into homelessness, I'd forgotten what hope felt like. My phone, kept active through a government assistance program, became just a clock and weather app. No one called anymore. No one needed David Patterson, former business owner, current nobody. Depression isn't dramatic when you're homeless. It's not crying or screaming. It's staring at the ceiling of your car for hours, unable to move, unable to care. It's watching normal people live normal lives and feeling like you're watching from another dimension, separated by glass you can't break. But something in me refused to die completely. Maybe it was my father's voice, dead, 37 years but still clear. Patterson men don't quit. Maybe it was spite, the desire to outlive Sarah's prediction that I'd fall apart without her. Maybe it was just biological stubbornness, the same trait that had built a business from nothing. That Tuesday afternoon, I'd been rejected from a construction crew for being too old. Insurance liability, the foreman said, not unkindly. I'd driven to the rest stop outside Dayton, counted my $17 3 times as if it might multiply, and opened that can of beans that tasted like surrender. Then the phone rang. Linda Martinez from Alaska, talking about property I'd forgotten existed, taxes I'd never known about, and oil companies offering millions for mineral rights to land I'd inherited from an uncle I'd met once. Uncle Walter. I remembered him now more clearly than I had in decades. Tall, weathered, quiet. He'd arrived at our house when I was 7, driving a truck that looked like it had crossed the Arctic on willpower alone. My father, his younger brother, had hugged him with tears in his eyes. They'd talked late into the night while I pretended to sleep, listening to stories about Alaska, about chances taken and missed, about land that went on forever. "Promise me something, boy," Walter had said to me before he left. He'd knelt down, his knees cracking, his eyes level with mine. When life knocks you flat, and it will, remember that the ground you're lying on might be worth more than the sky you're looking at. I'd thought it was nonsense, the rambling of a strange old man. Now, 42 years later, sitting in a car that smelled like failure and beans, I understood. He'd known. Somehow he'd known that one day his nephew would need a miracle, and he'd spent 25 years in Alaska making sure one would be waiting. The email from Linda contained everything. Property deeds, tax records, geological surveys, letters from oil companies with offers that made my empty stomach flip. $20 million for mineral rights. More if I sold the land itself, enough to rebuild 10 times over, but first, $47,000 in 3 days. I scrolled through my contacts one more time. Kevin's number sat there, unchanged since he'd programmed it into my phone 5 years ago at Mom's birthday dinner. My successful younger brother who'd warned me about Sarah, who'd built his dental practice without drama or betrayal, who'd done everything right while I'd done everything wrong. The shame of calling him was crushing, but $20 million was waiting beneath Alaska permafrost, and shame was another luxury I couldn't afford. I pressed call. Before I could think about it too much, it rang twice. "David? Jesus! I've been trying to reach you for months. Where are you?" "I need help," I said, the words scraping my throat raw. "Not for me, for Dad's memory, for Uncle Walter." "How much?" Kevin asked immediately. No questions, no lectures, no conditions. $47,000. I can explain everything, but I need it by Friday or I lose something worth $20 million. "You'll have it tomorrow. Where do I send it?" Wednesday morning, I sat in the Anchorage County Records office, wearing the only clean clothes I had left, holding a cashier's check for $47,000. My hands shook as I pushed it across the counter to Linda Martinez, who looked exactly like she'd sounded on the phone. Efficient, sharp, and slightly amused by the drama unfolding in her typically quiet office. "Cutting it close, Mr. Patterson," she said, stamping the receipt. "The auction was scheduled for Friday at noon." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you own 340 acres of very valuable Alaska land, free and clear." She handed me a folder thick with documents. "And I'd suggest you answer your phone. It's been ringing nonstop." Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Alaska area code. "Mr. Patterson, this is Richard Foster from Western Oil Corporation. We've been informed you've cleared the tax lien on parcel 82C559. We'd like to meet immediately to discuss our offer." Within an hour, I was sitting in a Denny's just off Highway 3, the only restaurant I could afford to host a meeting. 3 executives sat across from me, each representing different oil companies, each trying not to show how desperate they were. I hadn't showered in 3 days, was wearing a Goodwill shirt with someone else's initials on the cuff, and these millionaires were treating me like I held all the cards. Because I did. Richard Foster from Western Oil went first, sliding a folder across the table between the coffee cups and untouched menus. "Mr. Patterson, our geological surveys indicate your land sites above approximately 50 million barrels of recoverable oil. We're prepared to offer $22 million for the mineral rights. You retain surface ownership." The executive from Arctic Reserve Energy, a woman named Patricia Chen, laughed sharply. "Don't insult the man, Richard. Mr. Patterson, $25 million. Immediate payment, no contingencies." The third executive, Robert Kane from Summit Petroleum, hadn't spoken yet. He was older, silver-haired, with the patient expression of someone who'd won more negotiations than he'd lost. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "Gentlemen, Miss Chen, let's dispense with the dancing. Mr. Patterson, your uncle's land is positioned between 3 of our existing operations. Whoever controls those mineral rights controls the entire field's development. That's why we're all here, and that's why you can name your price." "Then name yours," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. $30 million for mineral rights plus 2% royalties on every barrel extracted for the next 50 years. At current projections, that's approximately $3 million annually in royalties alone. Patricia Chen started to counter, but I held up my hand. A hand that had unclogged toilets 6 months ago, that had signed away everything I owned to a woman I'd trusted, that had eaten from garbage cans when the hunger got too bad. $32 million, 3% royalties, and I want $10 million transferred within 72 hours. Robert Kane smiled like I'd passed a test. "Done." We signed the initial agreement right there in Denny's between the sticky menus and fluorescent lights, while truckers ate pancakes at nearby tables. The most important business deal of my life, worth more than everything I'd lost 7 times over, concluded in a booth with duct-taped seats. Thursday morning, Kevin drove up from Michigan. I was still in the Civic at the rest stop when his BMW pulled alongside. He got out, took one look at how I was living, and pulled me into a hug that broke something inside me I'd been holding together with spite and stubbornness. "Why didn't you call sooner?" he asked. "Pride," I said. "Stupid, expensive pride." "What's this about Uncle Walter and $20 million? I showed him everything, the documents, the contracts, the pending transfer confirmation. He read through it all twice, then looked at me with an expression I'd never seen from my successful younger brother. Awe. "He saved you," Kevin said quietly. "That crazy hermit who lived in a trailer in Alaska saved you." Friday at 3 p.m., the transfer hit my account. $10 million. The bank called 3 times to verify it wasn't fraud. I sat in my car staring at the number on my phone screen, unable to process that those digits belonged to me. My first purchase was a room at a Holiday Inn. Not the Ritz, not the Four Seasons. Just a clean room with a hot shower and a bed that didn't require folding myself into a pretzel. I stood under that shower for an hour, water hot enough to burn, washing away 6 months of rest stop, sinks, and paper towels. The second purchase was a phone call to my daughters. Emma answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad?" Her voice was cautious, suspicious. "I'm not calling for money, sweetheart. I'm not calling to talk about your mother. I'm calling because I love you. And I want you to know that whatever you've been told, whatever you believe, that will never change." There was silence, then a small sob. "Mom said you'd call eventually, trying to manipulate us." "I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I just wanted to hear your voice, to tell you and Olivia that I'm okay and I love you both. That's all." "Dad, are you really living in your car?" Tom Russell told us when we saw him at Kroger. "Not anymore," I said. "Things are changing, but even when I was, even at the lowest point, you and your sister were what kept me going." We talked for an hour. Then Olivia joined on speaker. The truth about Sarah and Marcus was starting to crack through their mother's narrative. They'd noticed things. Marcus practically living at the house before the divorce was even final. Their mother's stories not quite adding up. The business failing under her management. "Can we see you?" Olivia asked finally. "Anytime you want." Saturday morning I met with the best law firm in Columbus. Not for revenge, though they assured me we had grounds for fraud charges against Marcus and Sarah, but for protection. To ensure that this windfall couldn't be touched by anyone who'd tried to destroy me. The senior partner, Marcus Chen, reviewed the divorce decree and shook his head. The irony is perfect. Because they took everything in the divorce, they have no claim on inheritance or assets acquired after the final decree. Your ex-wife legally separated herself from the very fortune she could have shared. That afternoon, I drove past my old business. A for sale sign stood in front of the building I'd bought 15 years ago. Tom Russell was right. Sarah had destroyed in 18 months what I'd spent 22 years building. The parking lot was empty except for one truck, my original van that I'd kept for sentimental reasons, now rusting behind the dumpster. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no sadness, just a strange peace. That business had been my first life's work. Now I had resources for a second life, one built on rock instead of trust in the wrong people. The first $1 million check I wrote was to Kevin, paying him back 20 times what he'd lent me. He tried to refuse it, but I insisted. "You saved me when no one else would," I told him. "You didn't just lend me money, you gave me back my life." I bought a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Denver. Paid cash, nothing fancy. After living in a Honda Civic, anything with a bathroom felt like a palace. I furnished it simply. A bed that didn't require contorting my spine, a couch that wasn't a driver's seat, a kitchen where I could cook beans in a pot instead of eating them cold from a can. My daughters visited 2 weeks after the money cleared. They stood in my simple apartment, confused by the lack of luxury. "Dad, you have $30 million, Emma said. "Why are you living like this?" "Because I learned the difference between having money and needing to show it," I told them. "Your mother and I built a life based on appearances. Look where that led." The truth about their mother emerged gradually. Marcus had left her 3 months after the divorce finalized, moving on to another wealthy woman he'd met at the country club. The business was hemorrhaging money, down to 3 employees from 12. She'd listed the house for sale but couldn't find buyers at her asking price. "She cries a lot," Olivia told me quietly. "Drinks wine and talks about how unfair life is." I felt no satisfaction hearing this. Sarah had been my wife for 24 years, the mother of my children. Her destruction brought me no joy, only a sad understanding of how greed and betrayal poison everything they touch. The investigation my lawyers initiated revealed the depth of Marcus's corruption. He'd orchestrated similar schemes with 4 other clients, always targeting successful men who trusted their wives completely. The FBI got involved when they discovered he'd been laundering proceeds through offshore accounts. He was disbarred, arrested, and eventually sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Judge Patricia Thornton, who'd ruled against me so decisively, resigned suddenly for personal reasons. When the investigation revealed unusual deposits in her accounts, correlating with Marcus's biggest cases, the local news ran the story for a week. I watched from my apartment in Denver, feeling vindicated but not victorious. I established the Walter Patterson Foundation with $5 million in initial funding. Its mission: helping divorced fathers who'd lost everything rebuild their lives, not just financially, but emotionally and practically. The first recipient was James Rodriguez, a carpenter from Chicago living in his van with his young son after his ex-wife's lawyer pulled similar tricks to Marcus's playbook. "I don't understand," James said when I handed him the check for $50,000. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because someone I never really knew helped me," I said, thinking of Uncle Walter and his Alaska trailer, paying taxes on frozen land for 25 years. Sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places. The foundation grew quickly. Within a year, we'd helped 47 men transition from homelessness to stability. Each success story healed something in me that Sarah's betrayal had broken. Purpose, it turned out, was worth more than any amount of money. I saw Sarah one last time, about 18 months after that phone call from Alaska. I was in Columbus visiting my daughters, pumping gas at a station off High Street. She pulled up in a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, the kind of car she would have mocked during our marriage. Our eyes met across the pump island. She looked older, tired, wearing the kind of defeat I recognized from my own reflection during those 6 months in the Civic. She started to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to ask for money, maybe just to acknowledge the cosmic irony of our reversal. But I simply finished pumping my gas, got in my truck, a reliable Ford F-150, nothing flashy, and drove away. There was nothing left to say. My daughters graduated debt-free, their college funds intact despite everything. Emma went to medical school, Olivia became an engineer. They visit regularly now, bringing boyfriends I try not to terrorize with protective father energy. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, honestly, without the weight of lies between us. Tom Russell bought my old business for $200,000, a fraction of its former value, but all he could afford. I held the note personally and forgave it after 6 months. He's rebuilt it properly, and Patterson Plumbing Services again has contracts all over Columbus. Sometimes he calls for advice, and I'm happy to give it. I keep 3 photos on my desk in Denver. One of my daughters at their graduation. One of my father, who died when I was 12, but whose voice still reminds me that Patterson men don't quit. And one of Uncle Walter, that single photo from his visit when I was 7, both of us holding fishing poles in front of his rusty truck. On the back, in Walter's shaky handwriting, "Family is wealth that compounds over time." He'd paid taxes on that Alaska land from 1973 to 1998, spending probably $50,000 over 25 years to maintain ownership of what everyone thought was worthless tundra. He never developed it, never sold it, never even visited it in his final years. He just held it, like he was waiting for something. Now I understand. He was waiting for me to need it. Waiting. Somehow this hermit uncle I'd met once knew that someday his nephew would lose everything and need a miracle. Buried under Alaska permafrost, he'd invested in my salvation decades before I needed saving. The $32 million changed my life, but not in the ways people might expect. I don't drive supercars or live in mansions. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I learned that wealth isn't about what you can buy, but about the freedom to choose. The freedom to help strangers who remind you of yourself at your lowest. The freedom to forgive without forgetting. The freedom to rebuild without revenge. Every morning I wake up in my modest apartment, make coffee in a real kitchen, and check the foundation's emails. Stories of men destroyed by betrayal, living in cars, eating cold beans, holding on to hope by their fingernails. Each one gets a response, gets help, gets the chance I got because a strange uncle in Alaska believed in compound interest of a different kind. Sarah stole my money but gave me something priceless. The knowledge that I could survive anything. That rock bottom has a basement, but even in that basement, there might be oil waiting to be discovered. You just have to survive long enough to find it. The $47,000 in back taxes I paid, I had the receipt framed. It hangs in my office with a simple plaque. The best investment I never knew I made. Uncle Walter died alone in a trailer in Alaska, probably eating beans from a can like I did in that Civic. But he died knowing he'd left more than land to his nephew. He'd left a lesson about patience, about playing the long game, about how family wealth isn't always measured in dollars, but in the determination to help each other across decades and distances. Sometimes the biggest fortunes are hidden in the most unexpected places. Sometimes they're guarded by angels who look like hermits, protected by decades of paid taxes and patient waiting. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what was always yours. Sometimes salvation comes from Alaska, from an uncle you met once, from land you never knew existed. And sometimes it comes exactly when you need it most.